Hello and welcome to this edition of Africa Today, a program which provides an in-depth analysis on news making headlines in Africa. In this edition, we are analyzing the end of the French colonial currency, the CFA franc in West Africa, and the launch of a new currency. We are asking, will the new currency be a mere rebranding of the past and thus continued economic imperialism? We are also reviewing the economic situation in Sudan and efforts to revive the country's battered economy. We are asking, will the new government be able to secure the much-needed support for debt relief to revive the economy? I'm your host, Mubarak Kenya. Stay with us. Since 1945, the CFA franc has been the currency used by French colonies, and the usage of the currency continued after independence. The CFA is part of French colonial legacy, which still continues to tower over many African countries.
The CFA franc zone consists of two separate economic and monetary unions with formally two separate currencies, both called the CFA franc, which are pegged to the euro at the same fixed parity. The announcement that the CFA is to be abandoned was made last December during a visit by French President Emmanuel Macron to Ivory Coast. The host country's President Alassane Ouattara announced three major changes to the ECOWAS's currency setup.
For more incisive analysis on this issue, we have contacted Abayomi Azikiwe, editor of the Pan-African Newswire and a co-founder of the Michigan Emergency Committee Against War and Injustice. Now, Mr. Azikiwe, thank you for joining us. As you know, France has over the last 6 decades continued to directly dominate and control the economies of its former African colonies to their detriment. How did France benefit from this neo-colonial imperialism?
They benefit through the linking of the CFA franc, which is a regional currency that's pegged to the French franc. They also benefit by having French military forces stationed in former French colonies in Africa. And they, of course, benefit from the exploitation of African resources, natural resources in the region, such as oil, uranium, cocoa, coffee, and other commodities.
The CFA franc, which was initially pegged to the French franc and has been linked to the euro for nearly 2 decades, is now being rebranded and will formally be known as the ECO. French President Macron claims that this change is historic, while pledging that the ECO will be unveiled sometime this year. But despite Macron's claims of seeking to end his country's neo-colonial grip on Africa, French companies still have a quasi-monopoly over the most strategic areas in Francophone economies.
Mr. Azikiwe, the French President Emmanuel Macron says the new West African currency, to be known as the ECO, will end his country's policy of directly controlling the economies of its former African colonies. What's your take on this change of policy by France?
Well, it's not clear exactly what the relationship is going to be between the French currency and the ECO. What we understand is that the ECO, which is being issued by a number of states within the economic community of West African states, is going to be pegged to the European dollar, the euro. So therefore, there still will be that dependency in regard to the value of the currency and the purchasing power of the currency vis-a-vis Europe as well as North America.
French colonial policies have also been blamed for the current refugee crisis in Europe. During his period as deputy prime minister, the current Italian foreign minister, Luigi Di Maio, accused France of exploiting Africa and fueling migration to Europe.
Che se vogliamo continuare a parlare degli effetti, continuiamo con la retorica sui morti in mare, che ovviamente sono una tragedia e hanno tutto il mio cordoglio. Ma detto questo, noi dobbiamo parlare delle cause. Se oggi noi abbiamo gente che parte dall'Africa è perché alcuni paesi europei, con in testa la Francia, non hanno mai smesso di colonizzare l'Africa. Ci sono decine di stati africani in cui la Francia stampa una propria moneta, il franco delle colonie, e con quella moneta si finanzia il debito pubblico francese. Se la Francia non avesse le colonie, perché così vanno chiamate, africane, che sta impoverendo, sarebbe la 15ª forza economica mondiale, e invece è tra le prime proprio grazie a quello che sta combinando in Africa. Allora io ho smesso di fare l'ipocrita parlando come tutti quanti gli altri solo degli effetti e ho deciso di cominciare a parlare esclusivamente delle cause. L'Unione Europea dovrebbe sanzionare tutti quei paesi come la Francia che stanno impoverendo gli stati africani e stanno facendo partire quelle persone, perché il luogo degli africani è in Africa, non in fondo al Mediterraneo.
African countries are now taking decision to delink their country from the colonial CFA franc and establish a new currency. What has brought about this change of policy in this African renaissance?
But on a mass level, the leadership feels they are compelled to respond to what the working people, the farmers, and the youth actually desire. They desire more economic independence, and they desire more direction in regard to economic planning. So I think it's a response to the mass outcry on the part of the citizens and residents of these countries. However, at the same time, the leadership realizes that France still maintains a stranglehold over its former colonies, particularly in West Africa.
The CFA franc, particularly the obligation for member states to keep half of their reserves at France's central bank, hampered industrialization and agriculture by keeping the exchange rate artificially high. According to the 2019 Human Development Index, out of 189 countries, the worst countries are Chad, Central African Republic, and Niger, all from Francophone Africa. Should these African countries demand for reparation from France for their current predicament?
Yes, they should. They were highly exploited during the period of slavery and colonialism. France has only taken out of these regions. They have put very little back in terms of development resources. So I think it would definitely be in order that these countries, one, demand reparations for the history of slavery and colonization and neocolonialism, and at the same time demand more equitable trade and investment policies coming from Paris to these various countries. Otherwise, these countries will remain stagnant, or they will become even further underdeveloped.
Some analysts believe that the apparent policy shift announced by Macron is actually a change of tactic by France to maintain competitiveness in the international arena and to sustain its current position through maintaining its hegemony over its former African colonies. Considering the fact that ECO's value will be pegged to the euro just like the CFA has been for more than 2 decades, are we going to really witness a new currency or a rebranding of the past and thus continued economic imperialism?
Well, this is a good question, and I don't think it's clear right now exactly what the impact is going to be, but as we mentioned earlier, the fact that it is still pegged to the European currency is not a good sign. Africa needs to develop its own currency, not just on a regional level, but continental level. And there's plenty of natural resources, agricultural commodities, strategic waterways, and human capital to back up that currency. It's just a question of breaking down the barriers to trade.
Meanwhile, 6 English-speaking countries of the Economic Community of West African States have rejected the ECO currency as announced by 8 Francophone countries. the Anglophone nations of Nigeria, Ghana, Gambia, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, along with Guinea, issued a communique in January condemning the move to unilaterally rename the CFA franc as the ECO.
The meeting also noted with concern the declaration by His Excellency Alassane Ouattara, Chairman of the Authority of the Heads of State and Governments of the West African Economic and Monetary Union, WEMO, on the 21st of December 2019, to unilaterally rename the CFA franc as ECO by the year 2020. WAM's Convergence Council wishes to emphasize that this action is not in line with the decisions of the Authority of the Heads of State and Government of ECOWAS for the adoption of the ECO as the name of an independent ECOWAS single currency. WAM's Convergence Council reiterates the importance for all ECOWAS member countries to adhere to the decisions of the ECOWAS Authority Heads of States and Government towards the implementation of the revised roadmap of the ECOWAS single currency program.
It will not make sense to promote West African monetary integration without involving major economies, especially Nigeria or Ghana. These countries have raised objections and say that they will only join the new West African currency if it is not pegged on the euro. Now, Mr. Azikiwe, will this delay the formation of the new currency?
Ghana and Nigeria are two major economies in West Africa. Nigeria, of course, being the largest economy in West Africa. I think it's still a continuation of the division that was developed during colonialism between those countries that were colonized by Britain and those that were colonized by France. Both Nigeria and Ghana were colonized by Britain. So this could be a continuation of those type of divisions, which will have to be overcome in order for any real economic development and genuine economic independence to occur. So there should be further talks and discussions around this question.
The fact that it was French President Emmanuel Macron who announced the end of the West African CFA has raised doubt on the real intentions of Paris, with critics saying that this is an indication that France's neo-colonial grip on Africa continues.
Do you think the move by African countries to attempt to delink from French monetary imperialism will lead to similar moves in the political, military, and cultural sectors?
It depends upon the political will of those parties and interests that are in power. It has to happen. There has to be a total break with imperialism in order for Africa to truly develop. And that's why it's necessary for the issuance of new currency, for the development of a monetary zone for the African continent, and also a security apparatus that's independent of the United States, France, and the entire NATO project.
And now in this segment of our program, my colleague Sheila Nelima will be bringing you news and events from across Africa. What do you have today, Sheila?
Thank you, Henia. Hello and welcome to this part of the program. It's Sheila Nelima bringing you news from around Africa. A political change of heart. Africa is famous for having leaders who never want to leave their seat unless forcefully expelled. But three of these not only want to leave when it's time, they are encouraging others to take up the seat after them. Tanzania's Magufuli, Burundi's Nkurunziza, and Rwanda's Kagame have expressed their intention to step down and let others take the lead. President Kagame further urged women to one day lead the nation, while Tanzania's Magufuli encouraged all Tanzanians to believe that they too can lead just as he did. Now, to the world of apiculture, Rwanda is gaining momentum. The Rwandan Agricultural Board has partnered with Rwanda Water and Forestry Authority to use state forests for beekeeping activities. The aim is to increase honey production through modern farming methods and encourage the youth involvement in agriculture. Total honey production was around 4,500 tons, and they hope to double it by 2024. Still on the same East African country, the Digital Inclusion Challenge in Rwanda. The challenge began by MTN Rwanda and Pascal Technology Limited donating smartphones to every household in order to ensure that every citizen gets connected to the digital revolution. The telecom companies raised the bar by challenging the government to take part. So far, over 37,000 smartphones have been donated, with more still to come. In other news, Angola is on its way to self-sufficiency in wheat production. The Great Mills of Angola administration revealed that projects are ongoing to expand their mills. These, they bet, will cause a double increase in annual production, thus exceeding the amount of consumption in the country. This brings us to the end of this part. Share your comments, opinions, and stories with us in our social media pages as shown on screen. Twitter at Africa_program, Instagram Africa Today TV program. Do stay tuned. We will be back soon.
The transitional government of Sudan, led by Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok, a prominent economist, inherited a lot of challenges from the deposed regime. Chief among them is the crippling economic crisis.
Last November, the Sudanese government announced a three-phase plan to address the nation's economic problems and achieve economic recovery. The announcement was made by Sudan's Finance Minister Ibrahim El-Badawi when addressing the plenary session of Sudan International Partners Forum, SIPF. The Sudanese government is also lobbying to be removed from the U.S. list of the so-called state sponsors of terrorism so that the country can qualify to get debt relief from international donors.
We will do our part, but we cannot do it alone. For this government to succeed, for this revolution to proceed into stable democracy in this very, very critical part of Africa and the Middle East, we need understanding and the support, and I'm quite certain we will get it.
For more on these, we have contacted Jock Madut Jock, Executive Director, Sud Institute. Now, Mr. Jock, the economy of Sudan boomed on the back of increased oil production, high oil prices, and large inflows of direct foreign investment until the second half of 2002. What are the factors that led to the decline of the country's economy?
There were several causes. The most important of which is the wars that Sudan was fighting. In all its peripheries. The southern Sudan was still part of Sudan, and the conflict was at its height. The Darfur crisis began in 2003. The conflict in Blue Nile and in Kordofan had been raging for about the same time as the conflict in southern Sudan. Then there were protests in Blue Nile. The economy suffered a great deal from the financing of the war and the loss of production in some of the areas of the country.
Sudanese Prime Minister Hamdok says he inherited a debt of $60 billion, adding that the country's economy was ruined due to years of corruption, mismanagement, and graft.
Combating corruption and addressing issues of the recovery of stolen assets is key priority. Billions of dollars were lost during the last 30 years. We will not rest until we recover it back in the interests of our people. 6, we work towards fair, and well-deserved women participation and representation in the structures of the transitional government. As I said earlier, our women were in the front line leading this revolution.
What steps should be taken by the new Sudanese government to obtain debt relief from international creditors?
A country that has improved its behavior with regards to open society and to democracy. If these things begin to look as they promise today, I think the relations would be good, and the creditors might be able to allow the Sudanese government to rearrange its debt service and debt payment. And I think that is what they need. I think right now everybody is hoping and sees that there is a potential for this government to improve the economy.
Meanwhile, the World Bank says that it will not consider Sudan for more lending or debt relief until it clears arrears of $16 billion owed to creditors. International financial institutions appear not willing to provide required support to Sudan under current circumstances. Now, considering the fact that a huge chunk of Sudan's debt is owed to International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, is the country capable of settling its debts with these Bretton Woods institutions?
At the moment, it is very unlikely that the World Bank and IMF can reorganize the Sudanese debt. First of all, the debt is massive, over $40 billion. And it doesn't look possible for Sudan to ever be capable of repaying this massive amount without killing themselves with austerity.
Sudan has been hit with sanctions since 1993, when the U.S. State Department listed the country as a state sponsor of terrorism. Finance Minister Ibrahim al-Badawi says the listing posed a crippling impediment to the transitional government's ability to access funds from the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank. Sudan's inclusion on a list of countries deemed sponsors of terrorism by the United States makes it ineligible for debt relief and financing from lenders. Will the U.S. allow the lenders help Sudan out of its financial crisis?
Massive mining potential, including gold mining, but also oil production and investment in infrastructure and in agriculture. These are all opportunities that can allow Sudan to be able to address its debt crisis. But unless the U.S. considers the possibility of removing Sudan from this list, these opportunities are limited. The removal of Sudan from this list is crucial for Sudanese economy to begin to improve and for the debt relief to begin to be considered.
Last December, the Friends of Sudan meeting was convened in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, to help tackle the country's economic and political challenges. The Friends of Sudan meeting was attended by representatives of 24 countries. Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok urged the Friends of Sudan group to provide political and economic support to overcome the current challenges and risks facing the transition process.
And finally, Mr. Jok, can meetings such as the Friends of Sudan help solve the country's economic crisis amid high expectations by the public after the overthrow of al-Bashir?
The requirement on both sides, the Sudanese people and government on the one hand and the rest of the world on the other, is to give some respect back to that revolution, which has actually revolutionized the country. It did not only just defeat a dictator. And I think the Sudanese people deserve a second chance to address the debt crisis and to improve their economy.
And on that note, we come to the end of this week's edition of Africa Today. Thank you for being with us, and join us in our next edition for more analysis, news and views from Africa, the rising continent. From me, Mubarak Kenya, and my team, it's goodbye for now.